Morning guys, Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School, out here working the trap line and back at the hunter's camp. I have a small possum here that it was more humane to kill this possum than to let this possum go. His leg was pretty badly messed up because it was a small animal in a big trap. And again, that goes back to pan tension. You know, if the pan tension's heavy on a trap, you're not going to catch those non-target small animals. But in this case, this is a baby possum. He must have been squirreling around there too much. Somehow he set it off and it busted his leg up pretty bad. So it's more humane to kill that animal and then utilize that animal for something else than to let him go off into the woods crippled for the rest of his life and possibly be eaten by a predator. So I thought what we do is we use this animal for educational purposes. I went ahead and cased him out, very similar to what I showed in the fox skinning video, except I did a much better job on this guy. So now what we need to do is, now that we have him cased out, and I went ahead and cut the tail off, this thing will make a very good small, like tobacco and pipe pouch, something like that, once we tan this hide out, or just a small pouch. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and process this hide, and we're going to tan this hide. So what we're going to do with this now is we have to flesh it. And to do that, we're going to use a fleshing beam and a fleshing knife. So stay with me and we're going to get right after it. Okay, what I've done here is I've just wrapped an emergency space blanket around my waist to make like a fleshing smock so that I don't get the grease and the guts and all that, so the grease and the fat and all that stuff all over the front of my clothes. You could use anything for this that you don't mind getting nasty. Actually, the long hunters back in the day that used to skin their animals and things like that and flesh their animals in camp didn't bother. They let their front of their hunting shirt or their smock get covered with grease, and that is part of the reason there's a place in Kentucky now called Greasy Rock Creek, was because those hunters used to lay down there to get water out of the creek to drink. They just lay down and like a puppy dog at the water bowl, and the grease from their shirt would wash off into the river and get, you know, greasy rocks with them laying on top of them, and it was called Greasy Rock Creek for that reason. So there is a mess to be had here if you're not careful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this animal down, and a fleshing beam this big is really meant for things like deer, but I can still use this fleshing beam, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lean against this animal with that smock and begin to push down and remove any bits of heavy fat and things like that off of this hide. And you can see them coming down right there. Now all of that could be rendered out to make tallow, as we've shown in other videos. That's all good usable stuff. It could also be used to make bait for other traps with no problem. I'm using the dull side of this fleshing knife, and then I'm going back with the sharper side. You really want to get as much of this fat off of here as you can, as much of this stuff down to the membrane almost, if you will, off of this hide before you tan it. It'll make it a whole lot easier to tan in the end. And a small hide like this is not going to take you hardly any time at all to get this done. Bigger hides obviously are going to take much more time. And once I get the side facing me done, and you can see this stuff that's coming off is just chunks. But that stuff, like I said, is all very usable. Okay, so once I get the one side done, and I'm pretty satisfied with that, then I'll move over and I'll turn the hide a little bit. Like I said, anything that comes off of this hide right now is definitely not waste. It's bait. I got a little stubborn spot right on the back, and you'll find that happens a lot, where you'll get a spot of meat. There it goes right there. It's coming off. There we go. Toss that to the side. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn this thing over to get the other side of him, where the face and neck are, and continue trying to get this off the top first. The shoulder areas on something like this will have a little bit thicker stuff on them you'll have to get off. And the neck, that's where a lot of their heavier meat is to keep them warm. And you got to be careful when you get up around these ears and stuff that you don't rip them off in the process of doing this. So you kind of got to, especially with a smaller hide, a more delicate hide like this, you got to take your time. You don't want to get in too much of a hurry with it. There's just a ton of fat, even on a small animal like this. So you can imagine a bigger animal, a bigger possum, would just have absolute loads and loads of fat that's usable to help you in your self-reliance. Okay. Readjust our apron here a little bit. It's not too bad. Let's take a quick look at it. Make sure we didn't miss anything really. Put our hand in there and kind of stretch it out a little bit and look at it all the way around. The only hole I see is the one right up here in the neck, and like I said, we could sew that up if we wanted to, right there where the head's at and the eyes and the ears. It's right on one side, but probably in the end I'm going to end up cutting this off anyway at the shoulder level and sewing that up to make that a pouch. So we'll just continue for right now as if we were going to use the whole hide. Okay, now that we have our hide fleshed, we want to get it stretched to dry. And I went and got an autumn olive branch here, and this is what I'm going to use to make a makeshift hide stretcher. Now, if we didn't have a fleshing knife in a wilderness situation, we could use the rib bone of a deer. We could use a split cannon bone of a deer. Any of those things that are fairly sharp but not sharp enough to cut holes in the hide will work for scraping that hide. You could even use a split stick if you had to from a piece of hardwood. Wouldn't work as well. Bone works the best. But if you've got a fleshing knife, then you've got the luxury. Again, knowing the local trees is important. This is a very long, slender green branch, like I said, from an autumn olive. And now what I want to do is I just want to start working that branch in the center a little bit, breaking the fibers down so that I can bend it almost in half and not split it out or break it. You might have to go as far as wetting this thing down, especially when it gets along toward winter. Branches are more dry and brittle. I've got one spot in it that's kinked a little bit, but that's not that big a deal. It's kinked right there just a little bit. What I want to do is I want to bend this center section a little bit more without breaking it if I can. And if it kinks, it's okay, as long as it doesn't split out. That's what I really don't want to happen. Now I can take my hide, and I've still got the flesh side out, and I can slide that up inside just like this. Pull it all the way over the top. Get that little nose piece sitting right there at the top. Straighten it out on the stretcher just like this. And now I can take this and I can tie another stick in between here with some bank line to stretch and dry that hide. Okay, and that's what we're looking for. Like I said, pretty much any forked branch, and I've just got a broken branch here with a fork in it. Any forked branch will work fine for the bottom of this to stretch it out, just like this. And I can tie that in place pretty easy with a short piece of bank line. I'll set that down for a second and get myself piece of bank line ready. All I'm going to do with that is just tie a loop in one end of it that I can use to self-tighten it or cinch it with, and then I'll just wrap it around there a few times. Won't be a big deal. Just tie an overhand knot in there that I can use for a slip and put my string through it just like that. Then come on one side and push out and this other side is going to be my lashing. So I'll just push that out as far as I want it. Then I'll wrap around that a few times this direction. And then I can push this up this way if I want to, like that. That's not going to go anywhere now. I can just loop that off or whatever I want to do with it. To save that piece of bank line so I can use it again later. Just tie kind of a half hitch into it, just like this. That bank line is really good at binding against itself anyway, so it's not going to hurt anything. Then I would just take it, and I can take a small piece of this bank line if I want to, that I've got on the tag end right here, and just tie a loop in the top of this and hang that to dry. Now you're going to want to hang this thing someplace obviously the animals aren't going to get to it. If you're in the wild, that's going to work just fine. I'm going to hang this up somewhere, you know, that's a cool dark place if we have the choice. Maybe inside the shelter over here, or up high in a shaded tree. If we were doing this out of our garage or whatever the case may be, we could put it in the garage. But we want this to be in a cool dark place that air can get to it, so that this hide starts to dry out and get kind of a slick feeling to it, and then we can go on to the tanning process. I'm Dave Canterbury at the Pathfinder School. I appreciate you joining me for this video on flushing and stretching a small hide. I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. I appreciate everything that you do for me, for my school, and for my family. Thank you very much, guys.